Okay, so picture this, right? It's 722 BCE, and the Assyrian Empire, you know, the guys who were basically running the show back then, well, they conquer the northern kingdom of Israel.
Right.
10 of the 12 tribes just vanish. Poof. Gone.
Like off the map.
Yep. The lost tribes of Israel.
Huh. I've heard of them. They're like shrouded in mystery, aren't they?
Totally. And so, what if I told you that there's a community in Ethiopia, no less, who believe that they might actually be descended from these lost tribes?
Really? Wow.
It's a pretty wild idea. So for this deep dive, we're going to try and figure out if there's any truth to it.
Sounds like a challenge.
We've got research, historical accounts, even some religious texts to sort through. It's going to be a lot.
Well, before we jump into all that, can we just, back up for a sec?
Sure.
What even happened with this Assyrian conquest thing? How do you just lose 10 tribes?
Well, that's where we're going to start.
Okay, cool.
So, historically, what went down with the Assyrian conquest, and how did the lost tribes just disappear?
Well, the Assyrians, they were kind of known for being a bit rough around the edges.
Yeah, a little aggressive, I'd say.
Yeah, they had this whole strategy of forced relocation. They'd conquer a population and scatter them across their empire.
So, like, divide and conquer?
Exactly. Break down national identity.
Yeah.
You know, so people couldn't rebel.
Makes sense. From a ruthless emperor point of view, I guess.
Yeah, and for those 10 tribes of Israel, it worked. They just vanished from the historical record.
That's crazy. It's like they were deliberately erased.
Pretty much. And of course, when something like that happens, people are going to try to fill in the blanks.
Right, and that's where all those theories about what happened to the lost tribes come from.
Exactly. There are tons of theories, tons of migration routes they might have taken. One theory links them to King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah, some Ethiopian traditions say that their son, Menelik I, brought the Ark of the Covenant to Ethiopia.
Oh, hold on. The Ark of the Covenant, like the actual Ark.
That's what they say.
Wow. Imagine if they actually found that.
That would be the archaeological discovery of the century, for sure.
So are there any actual historical clues to back any of this up? Or is it all just like legends and myths?
Well, that's the tricky part. It's hard to separate fact from fiction in these cases.
Yeah, when you're dealing with stories that are so old and so tied to faith, it's got to be tough to know it's real.
For sure. So where do we go from here?
Well, I guess we have to start by looking at the Ethiopian Jewish community itself, right?
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
You know, I was doing some research and I came across these terms, falasha and fuga, that were used to describe them.
Right.
I don't know, those terms just felt kind of, I don't know, a little off to me.
Yeah, you're right to feel that way. Falasha basically means foreigner or stranger. So right away, you're othering them.
Oh, I see.
And fuga, well, that's even worse. It's derogatory. It's actually linked to their use of the shofar, the ram's horn.
Oh, wow.
It shows that even within Ethiopia, they've faced a lot of discrimination.
So they were considered outsiders even before we get to the whole question of their lineage or connection to the lost tribes.
Sadly, yes.
And is it true that this kind of, prejudice continued even after they were officially recognized as Jewish by the Israeli rabbinate?
Yeah.
Really?
There are accounts of Ethiopian Jews facing racism even within Israel itself.
Wow. That's really hard to hear.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it kind of brings us to the whole question of race and ethnicity and how that intersects with Jewish identity.
It really makes you wonder just how inclusive the concept of Jewishness actually is when it comes down to it, doesn't it?
It does. What really makes someone Jewish? Is it all about bloodlines, or is it more about faith and how you live your life?
Yeah, it's a big question.
It is.
Okay, well, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the historical evidence. What evidence do Ethiopian Jews have to support their claim of being descended from the lost tribes?
Well, for them, a lot of it comes down to oral tradition. They have stories and customs passed down through generations that trace their ancestry back to ancient Israel.
I see, but is there anything more concrete than that? Any archaeological evidence?
That's where it gets a bit tricky. There isn't a lot of physical evidence to back up their claims. No inscriptions, no artifacts, nothing like that.
Ah, I see. So it's basically their word against the lack of hard proof, right?
Yeah, it's a classic case of oral history versus tangible evidence, and that's always going to be a source of debate.
But is there any middle ground?
Yeah.
Could there be another explanation for how they became Jewish?
Well, there's a theory that maybe their Jewish heritage doesn't come from direct descent from the lost tribes, but from conversions way back in ancient times.
So maybe they didn't come from the lost tribes geographically, but they adopted Judaism at some point in their history.
Right, exactly.
Huh. That adds a whole new layer to things, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like, does it even matter where they came from if they've been practicing Judaism for centuries?
It's a good question. It really makes you think about what it really means to be a part of the Jewish diaspora.
So we're basically saying that their legitimacy as Jews shouldn't hinge on whether or not they have a direct bloodline connection to ancient Israel.
I mean, that's a big question. It really challenges some fundamental ideas about what it means to be Jewish and who gets to decide that.
It does. It makes me think about all the different ways that people define their identities and how much weight we give to, like, blood versus belief.
It's a complex issue, and it's definitely something we need to explore further.
For sure. And speaking in complex issues, let's talk about the political side of all of this. I mean, the whole concept of aliyah, the right of return to Israel, how does that apply to Ethiopian Jews?
Yeah, that's where things get even more complicated.
I bet.
Aliyah is like this fundamental belief, right? Israel being the homeland.
Right, right.
But putting that into practice, well, it hasn't exactly been smooth sailing.
Especially for the Falashmira, right?
Yeah.
Like descendants of Ethiopian Jews who were forced to convert to Christianity a long time ago.
Yeah, and that makes their claim to aliyah, well, pretty controversial.
Because it challenges the whole idea of who's considered Jewish enough to qualify.
Exactly. The Falashmira bring up all these complicated questions about religious law, cultural continuity, and really about how we define Jewish identity.
It's like their history is so intertwined with forced assimilation that it makes it really difficult to untangle.
It really is.
And then there's the fact that Israel's policies on aliyah haven't exactly been consistent when it comes to Ethiopian Jews.
Right.
I mean, there have been times when they've completely halted immigration from Ethiopia and then restarted it and then halted it again. It just seems kind of arbitrary, doesn't it?
Some people argue that these inconsistencies are purely based on halakha Jewish religious law, with its emphasis on matrilineal descent.
Right, right. But others see it as something else entirely, right?
Yeah, some people see it as political maneuvering, like maybe demographic concerns are playing a role.
I see. So it could be a mix of both religious and political factors.
It's hard to say for sure, but it's definitely something to keep in mind as we explore this further.
Yeah, it really highlights it for Ethiopian Jews trying to make a life in Israel. It's not just about ancestral lineage. There are all these present-day factors that affect their lives and opportunities.
Absolutely.
And you know what? We should probably mention that we've mainly been talking about Beta Israel, which is the most well-known group of Ethiopian Jews.
Right, yeah.
But there are actually several other Jewish communities in Ethiopia.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like Beta Abraham.
Yeah, Beta Abraham.
They converted to Christianity, but they still hold on to parts of their Jewish heritage. So it's a complicated story.
Right, totally. And then there's the Gefet.
The Gifet, yeah.
With their traditions that link them to get the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah, they believe they're descended from the Levites, the tribe that was supposed to protect the Ark. It's fascinating.
I know. And we can't forget the Ubir.
Right, the Ubir, who've faced so much marginalization over the centuries, despite having deep roots in the Somali region of Ethiopia.
Yeah, it just shows that Jewish identity in Ethiopia is so diverse. It's not just one story. It's a whole bunch of stories woven together.
Absolutely.
I guess to really understand the Ethiopian Jewish experience, we need to recognize that complexity and be open to challenging our own assumptions about what it means to be Jewish.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start.
Definitely.
And you know what? This idea of the lost tribes, it's not just about Ethiopia.
Right, it's like a global phenomenon, isn't it?
Yeah, there are groups all over the world who claim to be descended from the lost tribes, like from the mountains of Kurdistan.
Villages in India.
Yeah, and each group has its own unique interpretation of history and tradition.
And there are even organizations like Jewish Voice Ministries International who are working to reconnect with these communities.
Yeah, they're doing some incredible work, providing aid and support, especially to communities facing persecution.
It makes you wonder, though, what's driving these efforts? Is it about fulfilling biblical prophecy, or is it more of a social or political movement?
That's the question, isn't it? I mean, either way, it's a reminder of how powerful this whole Lost Tribes narrative is. It still resonates today and influences how we think about Jewish identity on a global scale.
It's pretty amazing, really.
It really is. It makes you wonder, how far do the branches of the Jewish community actually extend?
Yeah, it's a question that'll probably keep scholars and historians busy for a long time to come.
For sure.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground already, and I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah, we've got a lot more to unpack.
This Ethiopian Jewish story, it's just so rich and multifaceted.
I know. There's just so much to explore.
It's incredible.
Totally. As we delve deeper into the Ethiopian Jewish experience, one thing keeps coming up for me.
What's that?
This tension between bloodline and belief. It's like, what are the essential ingredients of Jewish identity, right? Is it mainly about ancestry, passed down through generations? Or is it more about faith, about how you live your life regardless of your background?
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. It's like, what matters more? Your family tree or what you believe in your heart?
Right. And for centuries, the emphasis has really been on lineage.
Especially that whole matrilineal thing we talked about.
Exactly. But the Ethiopian Jewish story kind of throws a wrench in that traditional framework, doesn't it?
Because their ancestral claims don't really have much hard evidence to support them.
Right. It all comes down to oral tradition, which is important, don't get me wrong, but...
It's not enough for some people.
Exactly. So they face these ongoing questions about whether they're really connected to the lost tribes and, what that means for their place in the Jewish community.
So where does that leave us? I mean, if we can't definitively say yes or no to their ancestry, how do we approach their Jewish identity?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah, it feels like we're at a crossroads here.
It really makes you think, should Jewishness only be based on things we can historically prove?
Like DNA or archaeological evidence.
Yeah. Or should we give more weight to lived experience? Cultural continuity and religious practice, all that.
That's a huge question.
It is.
And I don't think there's an easy answer.
There really isn't. And the implications go way beyond just Ethiopian Jews, right? I mean, this affects the whole global Jewish community.
Because if we only stick to a rigid definition of who's Jewish, based purely on bloodlines.
Well, we could end up excluding a lot of people. People who've been practicing Judaism for centuries, maybe?
It's like, who gets to decide who's in and who's out?
Exactly.
Is it some religious authority?
Or is it about individual choice?
Or maybe communal acceptance. I mean, how do we even start to navigate that?
All good questions. And I think the Ethiopian Jewish experience forces us to grapple with these issues head on.
Yeah.
It brings up some uncomfortable truths about power dynamics and inclusion and, really about what it means to belong.
It's not just theoretical either.
No.
I mean, we see it playing out in real life with the Falashmira.
Oh, absolutely.
Their struggle to return to Israel under aliyah has been so controversial.
And it shows how complex and, honestly, sometimes inconsistent Israel's aliyah policies can be, especially when you're dealing with a community whose Jewish identity has been, disrupted.
Like through forced conversions or assimilation.
Exactly.
So on the one hand, you have the argument that halaga, Jewish religious law, should be the ultimate decider in who can make aliyah.
In traditional halakha, puts a lot of emphasis on that matrilineal descent.
Which the Falashmira don't have.
Right, because their ancestors were forced to convert to Christianity.
So that lineage is broken.
Right, but then
you could argue that the circumstances were so unique, so extreme.
Right.
That maybe there should be some flexibility.
Yeah, like they didn't exactly choose to abandon Judaism, did they?
Not really. It was more about survival, I think.
Exactly. And a lot of people point to their cultural practices and, their desire to return to their ancestral faith as proof that their Jewish identity never really went away.
It's tough.
It is.
It's like trying to balance religious law with historical context and personal experiences.
Exactly.
Like, where do you even begin to draw the line?
And the decisions about the Falashmira, they have a huge impact, not just on them, but on how Israel defines itself as a Jewish state.
And how it relates to the Jewish diaspora as a whole.
Right. And it makes you wonder, are there other biases at play?
Like, what do you mean?
I mean, even Ethiopian Jews who have a clear matrilineal connection have faced delays and obstacles when trying to make aliyah.
Huh. Yeah, you're right.
So you have to ask, is there a double standard here?
Like maybe it's easier for European Jews to gain citizenship than it is for African Jews.
It's a tough question to ask, but it's an important one.
Yeah. It's like, even within a Jewish state, we can't ignore the fact that race and ethnicity are part of the equation.
It's true.
It's like all these different threads are woven together, and it's hard to separate them.
Exactly. And the Ethiopian Jewish experience really forces us to confront those realities.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the challenges, but I'm also really interested in the cultural side of things.
Okay, yeah.
Like, what are some of the unique traditions that Ethiopian Jews have preserved? They must have some amazing cultural elements that set them apart.
Oh, they do. Despite everything they've been through, they've maintained such a vibrant cultural heritage.
Like what?
Well, their religious practices are a great example. They're based on the Hebrew Bible, of course, but they've also evolved over time.
So they've been influenced by their environment and their interactions with other cultures.
Right. Like, take their interpretation of kashrut.
Kashrut, you mean the Jewish dietary laws?
Yeah, they have very specific customs around how they prepare and eat meat.
I think I read something about that.
It's fascinating. They're really strict about preventing any contact between meat and dairy.
So like separate utensils, different cooking areas.
Exactly. It shows how seriously they take those rituals.
It's pretty incredible, actually.
It is.
And what about their synagogues?
Or mesigins, as they call them.
Mesquids, right? I've seen pictures. They look so different from the grand synagogues you see in other parts of the world.
Yeah, they're often more humble, made with wood and thatch.
Yeah, very natural materials. It's like stepping back in time.
It is.
But they're not just places of worship, are they?
No, they're like community centers, too. People gather there for festivals, for celebrations, even for education. It's a real hub of activity.
And I bet music and dance play a big part in their culture.
Oh, definitely. They have these amazing traditional songs and dances that are passed down from generation to generation. And their music often has these incredibly distinctive rhythms and melodies.
It's really beautiful.
It is.
It's kind of mind-blowing that they've managed to hold on to their traditions despite facing so much pressure to assimilate.
It really is.
It says a lot about their strength and resilience, I think. What do you think is the key to that?
I think it shows the power of culture and tradition, to give people a sense of identity and belonging.
Even when everything else seems uncertain?
Exactly. It's a reminder that even in the face of adversity, communities can hold on to what makes them unique.
It's a powerful message, I think. And it makes me appreciate how diverse Judaism really is.
Oh,
it's not one size fits all.
You got it. It's a tapestry, right? Woven from all these different customs and beliefs and experiences.
Yeah.
And it's been shaped by geography and history and interactions between different cultures.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
It really is.
And I think the Ethiopian Jewish experience really enriches our understanding of that diversity.
For sure.
It challenges us to think more broadly about what it means to be a part of the Jewish world.
Absolutely.
Like maybe there's room for a wider definition of Jewishness than we're used to.
I think so. I think their story pushes us in that direction.
And it's not just about broadening our definition.
Right.
It's about creating a more inclusive and welcoming space within Judaism where everyone feels like they belong.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the real takeaway here.
Their journey reminds me that Jewish identity isn't something static or fixed. It's always evolving, always adapting to new circumstances.
And at the same time, it's still grounded in those ancient traditions and that shared heritage.
Right. It's like a dance between the old and the new.
I like that. A dance.
And, it's not just about the individual level either, right?
Right.
The presence of Ethiopian Jews in Israel has had a big impact on the country as a whole.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, it forces Israel to examine its commitment to inclusivity.
And its responsibility to all those who consider it their homeland.
Yeah, it's a really complex conversation, and it's still going on today.
It is.
Before we move on, I want to circle back to something we talked about earlier.
Okay.
That whole global phenomenon of groups claiming to be descended from the lost tribes.
Oh, yeah. That's a fascinating one.
It's pretty wild, isn't it? I mean, we're talking about groups from all over the world.
I know. Pashtuns in Afghanistan, Igbo people in Nigeria.
It's like on every continent, you have people putting forth these theories about how they're connected to ancient Israel.
It really captures the imagination.
It does. And for a lot of these groups, it's not just about history.
Right.
It's about identity. It can shape their whole understanding of who they are.
And their relationship to Judaism.
Exactly. And even their political aspirations sometimes.
Like with the B'nai Manasseh in India.
Oh yeah, the B'nai Manasseh are fascinating.
They believe they're descended from the tribe of Manasseh.
And they've been working really hard to be recognized as Jewish and to make aliyah to Israel.
Their story is interesting because it shows how technology is playing a role in these reconnection efforts, with the internet and all that.
Yeah, like the B'nai Manasseh were able to connect with Jewish organizations online, learn about Jewish teachings, and really build momentum for their claims.
It's amazing how the internet can be used to rediscover and reclaim heritage.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, how many other communities are out there just waiting to have their stories heard and maybe even validated?
It's a really exciting thought, but it also comes with a lot of responsibility, I think.
Like, what do you mean?
Well, we need to be careful about how we approach these claims. We have to be sensitive to the possibility of cultural appropriation, you know.
Right, and we have to make sure we're engaging with these communities respectfully and responsibly.
Exactly. It's about listening to their stories and honoring their perspectives without imposing our own assumptions.
I think that's a great point. We have a lot to learn from each other.
We do.
Well, I have to say, this deep dive has been really eye-opening for me.
Yeah, me too.
The Lost Tribes narrative, it's just so complex, and it touches on so many different aspects of Jewish identity.
Absolutely.
I feel like we've only just begun to explore the surface.
Yeah, there's definitely more to uncover.
I'm excited to keep learning.
Me too. You know, I think the story of Ethiopian Jews, it really speaks to this universal search for belonging and identity.
It's something we all grapple with in
Well,
different ways.
yeah. Exactly. And it's a story that's still unfolding, you know? It makes us think about our own heritage, our own beliefs, and what really makes us who we are.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time for a little break. We'll be back soon to continue our exploration of Ethiopian Jews and the enduring mystery of the lost tribes of Israel. All right, so we're back, and I feel like my head is spinning a little bit.
All right.
We've gone from ancient Assyria to modern-day Israel, from debates about religious law to these global communities claiming lost tribes connections. It's been quite the journey.
It really has. And as we wrap up our exploration of Ethiopian Jews and the mystery of the lost tribes, I want to leave you with something to think about, a sort of final puzzle, you know?
Okay, I'm intrigued. Hit me with it.
What if, instead of seeing Jewishness as this like black and white thing, this yes or no question,
Right.
what if we thought about it as more of a spectrum?
A spectrum.
Yeah, like a tapestry of all these different experiences and connections. What do you think that could mean for the future of Judaism, like for the global Jewish community?
That's a really interesting idea. It's like we're expanding the definition of what it means to be Jewish, right?
Yeah.
Making it more inclusive.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that there are multiple paths to belonging, not just one right way.
It makes me think about how we can create a more welcoming space within Judaism, one where different voices and perspectives are not just accepted, but really celebrated.
Right. I mean, imagine a global Jewish community where the focus is on shared values, cultural practices, and a commitment to social justice.
Instead of getting hung up on who's in and who's out
Yeah.
based on some rigid criteria.
Exactly. It's about those common threads that bind us, you know?
Yeah. It's like, what if we focused on building bridges instead of walls?
I like that, building bridges.
And I think that's what the story of Ethiopian Jews really teaches us, right?
I think so.
Their journey is all about challenging those traditional ideas about Jewish identity and showing us that there's room for more flexibility, more understanding.
Absolutely. It's a testament to the idea that Jewish identity isn't something static, it's always evolving. It's shaped by history, by culture, by individual choices.
And their story reminds us that it's okay to question things, to push the boundaries, to create space for new ways of being Jewish.
Right. I mean, their resilience, their determination to hold on to their traditions, even when faced with all these challenges, it's really inspiring.
It is. It shows us that it's possible to hold on to your heritage, even in the face of adversity.
And their presence in Israel, it challenges the nation to think differently about itself, about its commitment to inclusivity, you know?
About what it really means to be a Jewish state in a globalized world.
Exactly.
It's a conversation that's still going on, and it's one that we all need to be a part of.
Well said.
Yeah. This deep dive has really been something else. I've learned so much about Ethiopian Jews, about the lost tribes, about Jewish identity as a whole.
Me too.
It's clear that there's still so much more to learn and explore.
There is. And we hope we've inspired you to do just that. I mean, there are tons of resources out there, books, documentaries, online communities, all dedicated to this fascinating subject.
So if you're curious, definitely check those out. And of course, we want to hear from you.
Yes.
Share your thoughts, your questions, your own experiences. Let's keep this conversation going.
Absolutely. You can find us on our website, on social media, all the usual places.
We love hearing from our listeners.
We do.
So until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, keep those minds open.
And keep asking those tough questions.
Exactly. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey.